They called her poison, a curse wrapped in skin, the Omega girl whose blood glowed silver and killed anything it touched. Her own pack exiled her to the shadows, praying she'd fade into nothing. But when they dragged her to the mountain fortress and threw her at the feet of the most feared Alpha King in the north, a monster who devoured tributes for sport, they made their first mistake. Because Seren Vale didn't come to die. She came to win. And the beast they fed her to? He was about to meet the only thing more dangerous than himself. A girl with nothing left to lose. Stick around till the end to see how the girl no one could touch became the one no one could stop. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's go. The morning Seren Vale was born, the midwife screamed. Not the usual cry of relief or joy that accompanied a new life entering the world, but a raw, guttural shriek of terror that rattled the wooden beams of the birthing cabin and sent every wolf within earshot into high alert. The woman stumbled backward, her hands blistered and smoking, staring down at the infant in the straw with eyes gone white with shock. "Silver," she whispered, the word barely audible over the baby's wails. "Her blood, it's silver." Seren's mother, Lyria Vale, barely conscious from the ordeal, reached weakly toward her daughter. But the midwife slapped her hand away, leaving an angry red welt across her knuckles. "Don't touch her! Don't you dare touch her!" Within the hour, the entire Thornridge pack had gathered outside the cabin, a sea of hostile faces pressed against the windows, murmuring darkly about curses and abominations. Seren's father, Marcus Vale, a respected hunter who'd served the pack for 20 years, stood rigid in the doorway, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "Let me see her," he said quietly. The midwife shook her head violently. "Marcus, I'm telling you, this child is wrong. When I cut the cord, my hands... Look at them." She thrust her ruined palms forward, the skin peeled back in places, raw and weeping. "Her blood did this. Silver blood that burns like acid. She'll kill anyone who touches her. She's my daughter. She's a curse." The word hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, angrier. Someone shouted about ancient prophecies. Another voice called for the child to be left in the woods, an offering to whatever dark force had spawned her. Marcus pushed past the midwife and knelt beside the basket where Seren lay swaddled in rough cloth, her tiny fists waving in the air. Even through the fabric, he could see it. A faint luminescence emanating from her skin, like moonlight trapped beneath flesh. Her eyes, barely open, were the palest silver he'd ever seen. She looked at him. Just a newborn, hours old, and she looked at him with an awareness that shouldn't exist yet. "Marcus?" His wife's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't let them take her." He reached down slowly, carefully, and brushed one finger against his daughter's cheek. Pain exploded through his hand. He jerked back with a hiss, watching in horror as the skin where he'd touched her began to blister, the flesh turning an angry crimson before his eyes. The baby didn't cry. She just stared up at him with those impossible silver eyes. The door burst open. Elder Rorik, leader of the Thornridge pack, stepped inside with 4 enforcers at his back. He was a massive man, gray-furred and battle-scarred, with eyes like chips of black ice. "Out!" he commanded. "Everyone out except the parents." The room cleared in seconds. Rorik approached the basket, looked down at the glowing infant, and his expression hardened into something between disgust and resignation. "I've seen this once before," he said, 60 years ago, in the Southern Territories. A child born with silver blood. They called it the glow curse. He turned to Marcus and Lyria, his voice devoid of sympathy. "That child lived 3 weeks before it poisoned its own mother while nursing. Then it died screaming, its blood eating through its skin from the inside." Lyria sobbed. Marcus's fists clenched uselessly at his sides. "There are 2 paths forward," Rorik continued. "We end this now, mercifully, before the curse spreads. Or," he paused, studying Seren with calculating eyes, "we see if she survives past 3 weeks. If she does, we exile her to the eastern boundary, a cabin far enough from the pack that she can't contaminate anyone, but close enough that we can monitor the situation." "You're talking about condemning our daughter to a life of isolation," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "She's just a baby." "She's an aberration," Rorik snapped. "And you should be grateful I'm offering her a chance to live at all. Most packs would have slit her throat the moment she was born." He leaned closer, his breath hot against Marcus's face. "But you've served us well, Hunter, so I'm giving you a choice. What will it be?" Marcus looked at his wife. Lyria's face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with a mother's fierce, desperate love. "The cabin," she whispered. "We take the cabin." Rorik nodded curtly. "You have until sunset to vacate your home. The eastern cabin will be prepared. You'll receive monthly provisions, but you're forbidden from entering pack territory. The child is never to come within 50 yards of another wolf. If she does, if there's even one incident, I'll have her put down myself. Understood?" They understood. 3 weeks became 3 months. 3 months became 3 years. Seren Vale grew up in a cabin at the edge of the world, surrounded by forest on 3 sides and a sheer cliff face on the 4th. Her parents loved her, gods they loved her, but they couldn't touch her. Not without pain, not without injury. Lyria learned to wrap her hands in thick leather gloves before changing Seren's clothes or bathing her in the wooden tub they'd fashioned for the purpose. Marcus built a special crib with high sides and soft padding, designed so Seren couldn't accidentally brush against the wood and poison it with her skin. They fed her with long wooden spoons. They spoke to her from across the room. They sang her lullabies from the doorway of her bedroom, never crossing the threshold. And Seren, even as a toddler, understood. She was poison. She was curse. She was the daughter who could never be held. But she was also sharp, sharper than anyone realized. By age 4, she'd taught herself to read from the handful of books her father smuggled from the pack's small library. By age 6, she was fluent in 3 languages: Common, Old Claw, and the guttural northern dialect her mother had learned as a child. By age 8, she'd memorized every medicinal plant within a mile of the cabin and could recite their properties, preparation methods, and dosage calculations without hesitation. Her parents marveled at her intelligence, even as it terrified them. What use was a brilliant mind in a body that killed everything it touched? "Maybe," Lyria said one night, speaking quietly to Marcus as they sat by the fire while Seren slept in the next room. "Maybe her curse will fade as she grows. Maybe she'll outgrow it." Marcus said nothing. He'd stopped believing in maybes years ago. At age 12, Seren stopped believing too. It happened during the monthly provision drop. Usually, one of the pack's junior wolves would leave supplies at the boundary marker, a cairn of stones 50 yards from the cabin, and disappear without a word. But this time, the wolf was new, young, curious. His name was Dane, and he was 16 years old with more arrogance than sense. Seren had ventured out to collect the supplies, moving quickly and keeping her head down as always. But Dane didn't leave. Instead, he stepped out from behind a tree, blocking her path. "So you're the cursed Omega," he said, looking her up and down with undisguised contempt. "You don't look that scary." Seren clutched the provision sack tighter, her silver eyes fixed on the ground. "Please move. Make me. I don't want trouble." "Too bad. I want to see what makes you so special." He moved closer and Seren backed up instinctively. "They say your blood glows. Is that true? Let's find out." He lunged. Seren tried to dodge, but she was small and he was fast. His hand closed around her wrist, and she felt it happen, the curse flaring to life like fire in her veins. Dane screamed and jerked away, but the damage was done. His palm was scorched black, the skin peeling away to reveal raw, blistered flesh beneath. He fell to his knees, clutching his ruined hand and howling. "I'm sorry," Seren whispered, horrified. I told you not to." "You burned me," Dane shrieked, tears streaming down his face. "You burned me, you freak!" He scrambled to his feet and ran, still screaming, leaving Seren standing alone in the clearing with her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 hours later, Elder Rorik arrived with a dozen enforcers. They surrounded the cabin in grim silence while Rorik hammered on the door. When Marcus answered, the elder didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your daughter attacked Dane Corwin." "That's not—" Marcus started, but Rorik cut him off. "The boy's hand is destroyed. He may never hunt again. The pack is calling for her execution." Lyria appeared behind Marcus, her face ashen. She didn't attack anyone. He grabbed her. She warned him. "She's a weapon. Rorik snarled. A walking death sentence. And I've protected her long enough. Tomorrow, we convene the Pack Council. They'll decide her fate. That night, Seren sat in her room and listened to her parents argue in hushed, desperate voices. She heard her mother crying. She heard her father's voice crack with helplessness. And she made a decision. If they were going to kill her anyway, she wouldn't go quietly. She wouldn't let them drag her to some ceremonial execution and butcher her like a rabid dog. She would survive. Somehow. She just had to figure out how. The Pack Council convened at dawn. They held it in the central gathering hall, a massive structure built from ancient oak and reinforced with iron, designed to withstand even the fiercest wolf in full shift. Every adult member of the Thornridge Pack was present, packed shoulder to shoulder on rough wooden benches, their faces uniformly hostile. Seren stood in the center of the room, alone, with her wrists bound in specially treated silver chains that burned her skin wherever they touched. Her parents had been forbidden from attending. This was pack business, and they'd already shown too much favoritism toward the aberration. Elder Rorik sat at the head of the council table, flanked by the pack's 5 senior members. To his right sat Dane's father, Corvin, a hulking brute with murder in his eyes. "Seren Vale," Rorik began, his voice echoing through the hall. "You stand accused of assault against a pack member. How do you answer?" Seren lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily despite the terror clawing at her insides. "I defend myself against the charge. Dane Corwin was warned. He chose to ignore that warning." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Liar!" Rorik raised a hand for silence. "Dane claims you deliberately burned him, that you used your curse as a weapon. That's not true. She's a monster," Corvin roared, surging to his feet. "My son can't hunt anymore because of what she did. His hand is ruined. She should be put down like the diseased animal she is." The crowd erupted in agreement, a cacophony of angry voices demanding justice, demanding blood. Seren's heart hammered. She looked around the room and saw nothing but hatred. These were the people she'd grown up on the fringes of, the community she desperately wanted to belong to despite everything, and they wanted her dead. "Enough!" Rorik's command cracked like a whip, silencing the hall. He turned his cold gaze on Seren. "The council has already discussed this matter at length. We see 3 options. First, execution, clean, final. The majority support this." Seren's breath caught. "Second, permanent exile beyond our territory, with a death warrant if you're ever seen again." Not much better. "Third," Rorik paused, and something calculating flickered in his eyes. "We offer you as tribute." The room went silent. "Tribute?" someone asked. "To who?" Rorik leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Word came 2 weeks ago from the north. The Highland clans have united under a new ruler, an Alpha King named Kyle Draven. He's conquered 17 territories in 3 years, and he's unconventional in his methods." "What does that mean?" Seren asked quietly. "It means he takes tributes from the packs he absorbs. Young wolves, usually omegas or low-ranking betas. He brings them to his fortress and uses them in trials, games, tests of survival and strength." Rorik's smile was thin and cruel. "Most don't survive, but those who do earn a place in his inner circle, wealth, status, power." Seren's mind raced. "You want to send me to die in some warlord's arena instead of killing me here?" "I want to give you a chance," Rorik corrected. "A slim one, admittedly, but more than you'd get with a blade across your throat. And if you do survive, which I doubt, you'll be far away from here, no longer our problem. And if I refuse, then we proceed with option 1, immediately." Seren looked around the room again. Every face was hard, unforgiving. These people had never seen her as anything but a curse. Even if she somehow convinced them to spare her life today, she'd spend the rest of her existence looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next Dane to decide she wasn't worth the air she breathed. At least in the north, she'd be facing a different kind of death. One she might have a chance to outthink. "I accept," she said clearly. "I'll go." Rorik nodded, unsurprised. "The caravan leaves at dawn tomorrow. You'll be escorted to the border and handed over to Draven's representatives. May the..." He paused, seeming to reconsider whatever platitude he'd been about to offer. May you find what you're looking for. They released her from the chains and marched her back to the cabin under guard. Her parents were waiting outside, both of them pale and hollow-eyed. Seren! Lyria sobbed, reaching toward her daughter before remembering at the last second and pulling back, her hands hovering uselessly in the air. No, they can't. This isn't... It's okay, Mom, Seren said softly, even though it wasn't, even though she was terrified. It's better than the alternative. Marcus looked older than she'd ever seen him, his face lined with grief. We failed you. We should have fought harder, should have... You gave me 12 years, Seren interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears burning in her eyes. 12 years I wouldn't have had anywhere else. That's not failure. That's a gift. They stood there in the fading light, a family that could never touch, saying goodbye in the only way they knew how, with words and broken hearts, and the unbearable weight of love that had nowhere to go. That night, Serene packed the few belongings she owned, 3 books, a change of clothes, and a small knife her father had left on her windowsill years ago. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window and watched the stars wheel overhead, memorizing the constellations like she'd memorized everything else, as if knowledge alone could keep her alive. When dawn broke, the escorts arrived, 4 grim-faced wolves who kept their distance as they led her through the forest toward the northern road. Her parents followed for the first mile, staying just within sight until the lead escort barked at them to turn back. Seren watched them fade into the trees, 2 small figures swallowed by green shadows. Then she turned north and didn't look back. The journey took 11 days. They traveled in a convoy of 5 wagons, each carrying tributes from different packs across the southern territories. Seren counted 19 other young wolves, all of them between 15 and 20 years old, all of them looking varying degrees of terrified and defiant. She was the youngest, and the only one who glowed. The other tributes kept their distance at first, eyeing her warily whenever she moved. But after 3 days on the road, curiosity won out over caution. Is it true your blood is poison? A girl named Mira asked one evening as they made camp. She was 17, tall and lean, with auburn fur and nervous energy. Serene nodded, not bothering to elaborate. Can you control it? No. So if someone touched you right now, they'd get burned, badly. Mira whistled low. And they're sending you to Draven. That's either really stupid or really genius. I haven't decided which yet, Seren admitted. Another tribute, a stocky beta named Cole, snorted from across the fire. Doesn't matter. We're all dead anyway. You heard the stories about what he does to tributes, right? The trials? He throws you into pits with wild beasts, makes you fight each other to the death, locks you in frozen chambers until you go mad. It's sick. Then why'd you come? Seren asked. Cole's jaw tightened. My pack gave me a choice. Volunteer as tribute or watch them execute my little sister for stealing food during the famine. So here I am. Around the fire, similar stories emerged. Debts paid in flesh, exile disguised as opportunity, desperate gambles made by desperate people. They were all expendable, every single one of them. Well, Seren said quietly, if we're all going to die anyway, we might as well make it interesting. A few of them laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was either that or cry. Man. On the 11th day, they reached the mountains. Seren had never seen anything like them. The peaks clawed at the sky like the spine of some ancient sleeping god, their slopes shrouded in mist and snow even in late summer. The road narrowed to a treacherous path carved into the mountainside, barely wide enough for the wagons. And there, perched on a plateau halfway up the highest peak, was the fortress. It was massive, a sprawling complex of black stone and iron with watchtowers that jutted like broken teeth against the gray sky. Even from miles away, Seren could feel the weight of it, the sense of something vast and hungry waiting inside. Welcome to the Frostmark Citadel, one of the escorts said with dark amusement. Try not to die before you get inside. Draven hates when tributes fall off the mountain, says it's wasteful. The climb took hours. By the time they reached the gates, Serene's legs were shaking and her lungs burned from the thin air. The gates themselves were enormous, 20 feet tall and reinforced with black iron, etched with symbols she didn't recognize. They opened without a sound. Inside, The courtyard was a hive of activity. Wolves in leather armor moved with military precision, training in coordinated drills. Smiths hammered at forges that belched smoke into the cold air. And everywhere, there was the scent of blood and iron and something else, something wild and wrong that made Seren's skin crawl. "Line up," a voice barked. The tributes were herded into a single file and marched across the courtyard toward a set of wide stone steps. At the top, framed against the entrance to the main hall, stood a woman in dark red armor. She was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and cold, and utterly lethal. Her hair was black as pitch, pulled back in a severe braid, and her eyes were the pale gold of a wolf in mid-shift. "I am Commander Vera," she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. "Second in command of the Frostmark forces. You are here because your packs deemed you worthy of tribute, or expendable enough to risk. Either way, you now belong to King Draven. You will be fed, you will be housed, and in 3 days you will face the trials." She descended the steps slowly, her gaze sweeping over them like a scythe. When her eyes landed on Seren, they narrowed fractionally. "Some of you will survive," Vera continued. "Most will not. Those who do will earn a place here. Rank, purpose, and the king's favor. Those who fail—" She smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "Well, the mountain is always hungry." She stopped directly in front of Seren, studying her with unnerving intensity. "You're the glow curse." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Seren said evenly. "Interesting. I've never seen one survive past infancy." Vera reached out as if to touch Seren's face, then stopped herself, her hand hovering inches away. "Tell me, does it hurt? The curse?" "Not to me, but to everyone else." Vera's smile widened. "Oh, the king is going to love you." She turned and strode back up the steps, barking orders. The tributes were divided into groups and led away to separate quarters, stone barracks carved into the fortress itself, cold and austere, but surprisingly clean. Seren ended up in a cell-like room with 3 other girls, including Mira. They were given simple clothes, a meal of bread and stew, and strict instructions not to leave the barracks until summoned. That night, lying on a hard cot with the sound of wind howling outside the narrow window, Seren stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the trials, tried not to imagine what kind of death awaited her in 3 days. But sleep wouldn't come. So instead, she did what she always did when fear threatened to overwhelm her, she thought. Somewhere in this fortress was an Alpha King brutal enough to conquer 17 territories. Somewhere above her was a man who'd built an empire on the bones of his enemies. And somewhere in that man's fortress was a weakness, a crack, a way to survive. She just had to find it. 3 days passed in a blur of cold stone and nervous whispers. The tributes were kept separate from the rest of the fortress, allowed only supervised trips to the meal hall and brief exercise periods in an enclosed courtyard. No one told them what the trials would entail. No one offered advice or training. It was psychological warfare, Seren realized. Keep them isolated. Keep them afraid. Break them before the first trial even begins. But she refused to break. Instead, she listened. She watched. She memorized the guard rotations, the layout of the corridors, the way Vera's wolves moved, always in pairs, always armed, always alert. She studied the other tributes, noting who had survival skills and who was already crumbling under the pressure. On the morning of the 3rd day, they were woken before dawn and marched to the main hall. It was a cavernous space, easily 100 feet long and 50 wide, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Torches lined the walls, casting flickering light across banners bearing the sigil of the Highland clans, a wolf's head silhouetted against a crescent moon, and at the far end of the hall, seated on a throne of black iron and bone, was Kyle Draven. Seren's breath caught. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the light behind him. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling just past his jaw, and his eyes, gods! His eyes were like molten gold, burning with an intensity that made every tribute in the room instinctively step back. He radiated power, not just physical strength, though that was obvious in the corded muscles visible beneath his dark leather armor, but something deeper. something primal and terrifying that sang in Seren's bones, even from across the room. This was an apex predator. This was the thing nightmares were made of. And she was standing in his den. "Welcome," Kael said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. "I'm sure you've been told many stories about me. Some are true, some are exaggerations. Most are not flattering." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "But I'll tell you what I am truthfully. I am a king who values strength, intelligence, and ruthlessness above all else. You are here because your packs believe you have something to offer. My job is to determine if they're right." He stood, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "The trials are simple in concept. You will face 3 challenges over the next 3 days: combat, survival, choice. Those who excel will join my ranks. Those who fail," he shrugged, "the mountain provides." Commander Vera stepped forward, unfurling a scroll. "The first trial begins at noon. You will be taken to the Western Arena and divided into pairs. Each pair will fight until one submits or dies. Winners advance. Losers are removed from the trials." Panic rippled through the tributes. Seren's mind raced. If she was paired with someone, they'd have to touch her eventually, which meant whoever fought her would be fighting with one hand destroyed before the match even began, assuming they didn't just kill her on sight to avoid the curse. "One more thing," Kael added, his golden eyes sweeping over them with predatory interest. "You may choose your opponent, or you may let me choose for you. Choose wisely." The hall erupted in frantic whispers as the tributes were escorted out. Seren barely heard them. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and options and desperate gambles. If she let Kael choose, he'd pair her with someone expendable, probably another tribute he expected to die anyway. A waste. But if she chose... The idea crystallized in her mind like ice forming on glass. It was insane. Suicidal. Exactly the kind of move no one would expect, which was precisely why it might work. At noon, they were brought to the Western Arena. It was an open-air coliseum carved directly into the mountain, with stone seats rising in tiers on 3 sides, and the 4th side open to a sheer drop into the valley below. The floor was packed dirt stained dark with old blood. The tributes were lined up along the edge, while Kael took his seat in the center of the viewing stands, flanked by Vera and several other high-ranking wolves. The crowd was small but vicious, soldiers and officers who'd come to watch the fresh meat tear each other apart. "First match," Vera called out. "Cole Martin and Rena Ash, step forward." The stocky beta from the caravan and a wiry girl with sharp eyes entered the arena. They circled each other warily, then exploded into motion. It was brutal and fast. Cole had strength, but Rena had speed, and she used it ruthlessly, darting in to slash at his hamstrings before dancing away. It ended when Cole's leg buckled and Rena got a knife to his throat. He submitted. The crowd jeered. "Next," Vera announced, "Mira Kellen and—" "I choose!" Seren's voice rang out clear and steady. Every head turned. Kael's eyes found her immediately, his expression unreadable. "You choose," he repeated slowly. "Interesting. Who?" Seren stepped forward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She met Kael's burning gaze and didn't flinch. "You," she said clearly. "I choose you, King Draven." The arena went dead silent. Then it exploded with shocked laughter and outraged shouts. Vera looked like she'd been slapped. Several of the officers were on their feet, yelling that this was madness, that a tribute couldn't challenge the king, that the girl had clearly lost her mind. But Kael smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who'd just spotted particularly entertaining prey. "Bold," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Stupid, but bold. You understand what you're asking for, little Omega. I've killed warriors 3 times your size without breaking a sweat. You'll last 30 seconds if you're lucky." "Maybe," Seren said. "Or maybe I know something you don't." His smile widened, showing teeth. "Very well, I accept." The crowd went wild. Kael descended from the stands with predatory grace, shrugging off his heavy cloak to reveal the full extent of his physique, all lean, dangerous muscle wrapped in scars. He rolled his shoulders, and Seren heard the joints pop. Any weapons? He asked mockingly as they faced each other across the arena. Just this. Seren held up her bare hands. Understanding flickered in his eyes. Ah, you think your curse will level the playing field? I think, Seren said quietly, that you didn't become king by being predictable. And I didn't survive 12 years as a walking death sentence by being weak. Fair enough? Kale settled into a fighting stance, and the air itself seemed to thicken around him. Let's see what you're made of, Seren Vale. The use of her name, God's he'd learned her name, sent a chill down her spine. Vera raised her hand. Begin! Kyle moved. He was fast. Faster than anything that size had a right to be. 1 second he was 10 feet away. The next he was on her, his fist driving toward her ribs with enough force to shatter bone. Seren twisted desperately, feeling the wind of his punch whistle past her side. She ducked under his follow-up strike and reached for his arm, her fingers brushing his bare skin. Silver light flared. Kale hissed and jerked back, looking down at his forearm where her fingers had made contact. The skin was already blistering, angry red welts spreading across the muscle. But he didn't retreat. Instead, he looked at the wound with fascination. Interesting, he murmured. Then he came at her again, even faster this time. Seren barely avoided the next strike, then the next. She was fast too. Years of running from predators and navigating dangerous terrain had made her quick and agile. But Kyle was on a different level entirely. He fought like a force of nature, each movement precise and devastating. She managed to land 2 more touches, scorching his shoulder and the side of his neck. Each time he absorbed the pain with nothing more than a grunt and kept coming. You're holding back, he said, almost conversationally as he drove her toward the edge of the arena. Why? I don't want to kill you, Seren gasped, her lungs burning. How considerate. He feinted left, then struck right, his palm connecting with her sternum and sending her sprawling onto her back. The impact drove the air from her lungs. Kale loomed over her, one massive hand reaching down toward her throat. This was it. He was going to choke her out, end the match, prove his point. Seren's hand shot up and grabbed his wrist. Silver light erupted like a star going nova, so bright the crowd gasped. Kale roared, not in pain but in something else, something raw and primal that made every wolf in the arena feel the sudden, overwhelming urge to submit. The light faded. Kyle was still standing, but his wrist was smoking, the flesh charred black in the perfect outline of her fingers. It should have been agony. It should have dropped him to his knees. Instead, he laughed. There it is, he said, his voice rough with something that might have been exhilaration. There's the real curse. He released her and stepped back, cradling his ruined wrist. The arena was silent. Even the bloodthirsty soldiers looked stunned. Enough, Kale announced. The match is over. I didn't submit, Seren said hoarsely, forcing herself to sit up. No, you didn't. He studied her with those impossible gold eyes, and she saw something shift in his expression, a calculation being made, a decision forming. Which means you win. The crowd exploded in confusion and outrage. Vera was on her feet, shouting something Seren couldn't hear over the noise. Kyle ignored them all. He extended his uninjured hand to Seren, an offer and a challenge. She stared at it, at him, for a long moment. Then she reached up and took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was warm, steady, and for the first time in her life, touching another person didn't hurt at all. Welcome to the trials, Seren Vale, Kyle said softly, for her ears only. You just became the most interesting thing in my kingdom. The infirmary smelled of herbs and copper. Seren sat on the edge of a wooden bench while a healer, an older woman with silver streaking her dark hair, examined Kyle's injuries with clinical efficiency. The king hadn't made a sound since they'd left the arena, even as the healer peeled away charred skin and applied salves that had to sting like hellfire. You should have stopped her after the first burn, the healer muttered, wrapping Kale's wrist in clean linen. This one's going to scar badly. Good, Kale said. I like scars. They tell better stories than words. The healer snorted but said nothing more. When she finished with his wrist, she moved to his shoulder and neck, working quickly. Seren watched from across the room, her own hands trembling slightly in her lap. She'd hurt people before, plenty of times, all accidents, but she'd never weaponized it. never used her curse deliberately to burn someone, and certainly never against someone who seemed utterly unbothered by the pain. "You're thinking too loud," Kael said without looking at her. Seren blinked. "What?" "I can hear you spiraling from here. Stop it." He dismissed the healer with a wave of his bandaged hand and turned to face Seren fully. "You did what you had to do to survive. That's not something to feel guilty about. I could have killed you, but you didn't, which tells me you've got control over that curse, whether you admit it or not." He stood, rolling his injured shoulder experimentally. "Most people would have panicked and flooded me with enough poison to stop my heart. You held back. Why?" Seren met his gaze steadily. "Because dead kings don't offer opportunities, and I need one." A slow smile spread across his face, not the predatory grin from the arena, but something almost approving. "Honest. I like that." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You'll stay in the eastern wing tonight. Private quarters, not the barracks. Vera will escort you." "Why?" "Because I don't trust the other tributes not to slit your throat while you sleep. You just humiliated them by choosing me instead of playing their game. That makes you a threat." He glanced back at her, his golden eyes catching the torchlight. "And threats tend to disappear in the night around here unless I explicitly protect them." Before Seren could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk. Commander Vera appeared moments later, her expression carefully neutral. "Come with me." They walked through corridors of black stone, past armories and training halls where wolves drilled even at this late hour. Vera said nothing until they reached a heavy wooden door in the quieter eastern section of the fortress. "Inside," Vera commanded, pushing it open. The room was small but well-appointed. A real bed with furs piled on it, a writing desk, a fireplace already crackling with warmth. Luxury compared to the barracks. Seren stepped inside cautiously. "The king said—" "I know what the king said." Vera's voice was cold. "Let me make something very clear, Tribute. I don't know what game you're playing, but Kael Draven is not a man to be manipulated. Smarter, stronger wolves than you have tried. They're all dead now." "I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I'm trying to survive. By challenging him to single combat, that's not survival. That's suicide with extra steps." Vera stepped closer, and Seren caught the scent of leather and steel. "You got lucky today." He was amused by your audacity. But amusement fades, and when it does, you'll be just another corpse on the mountain. "Then I'll make sure to stay amusing," Seren said quietly. Vera's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the seasoned commander and the cursed Omega. Then Vera turned and walked to the door. "One more thing," she said without looking back. "The next trial is tomorrow at dawn. Combat tested your courage. This one tests your mind. Don't embarrass the king by dying stupidly." The door closed. A lock clicked into place from the outside. Seren stood alone in the warm room and allowed herself, finally, to shake. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the desk and tried to piece together everything she'd learned. Kael Draven was clearly more than just a brutal warlord. He was strategic, calculating, and apparently immune to the kind of pain that would drop most wolves. The way he'd absorbed her burns, the way he'd kept fighting despite injuries that should have been crippling. Something was wrong with him, something beyond normal alpha physiology. And then there was the fortress itself, the oppressive atmosphere, the constant smell of blood, the way even the high-ranking wolves moved with an undercurrent of fear. This wasn't just a military stronghold, it was a pressure cooker, held together by sheer force of will. Whose will, though? Kael's? Or something else? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. It was barely past midnight. "Who's there?" she called. "Someone who might actually help you live through tomorrow." The voice was female, young, and unfamiliar. Seren opened the door a crack. A girl stood in the corridor, maybe 19 or 20, with copper-colored hair and keen hazel eyes. She wore the leather armor of Kael's soldiers, but carried herself with an easy confidence that suggested she'd earned her place here through more than just fear. "I'm Thea," the girl said. "One of the king's scouts, and you're the suicide girl who challenged him to a fight." That's one way to put it. It's the only way everyone's putting it. You're either insane or brilliant, and no one can figure out which. Thea glanced down the corridor, then slipped inside and closed the door behind her. I have about 5 minutes before Vera's patrol comes through, so listen fast. Seren nodded, her pulse quickening. Tomorrow's trial is the maze. It's a network of tunnels carved under the fortress, part natural caves, part excavated passages. You'll be sent in with the other remaining tributes and given a simple task. Find the center chamber and retrieve a token. First 3 to return with a token advance to the final trial. That doesn't sound so terrible. Thea's expression darkened. The terrible part is what lives in the maze. Kael stocks it with creatures from all over the highlands, dire wolves, cave bears, things that don't have names anymore. Most tributes get lost in the first hour. The ones who don't get lost get eaten. How do you know all this? Because I survived it 2 years ago. Thea pulled up her sleeve, revealing a wicked scar that ran from wrist to elbow. Barely. And I had training. You're a 12-year-old Omega who glows in the dark. You'll be a beacon for everything down there. 13, Seren corrected automatically, then shook her head. Why are you telling me this? Because the king gave specific orders that you're not to be killed before the final trial, which means I'm supposed to give you a fighting chance. Thea pulled a small leather pouch from her belt and pressed it into Seren's hands. Phosphor powder. Mix it with water and it creates a light source that lasts about an hour. Use it sparingly. And these, she produced 2 small vials. One's a stimulant if you need to run fast. The other's a sedative strong enough to drop a cave bear if you can get it in their system somehow. Seren stared at the items. This is cheating. This is surviving. There's a difference. Thea moved to the door, then paused. One more thing. The center chamber? It's not in the middle of the maze. It's at the lowest point. Follow the air currents down, not the paths that look traveled. The traveled paths are traps. Why are you really helping me? Thea smiled, but it was tinged with something sad. Because 2 years ago, someone helped me. And because I think you might actually be interesting enough to shake things up around here. We could use that. She slipped out the door as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving Seren alone with her contraband supplies and racing thoughts. Dawn came too quickly. Seren was roused by guards and marched down to the fortress's lower levels along with the 9 other tributes who'd survived the first trial. Cole was there, limping but alive. Mira too, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight braid. The others were strangers, hard-eyed youths who'd proven themselves capable of violence. They descended for what felt like miles, the air growing colder and damper with each level. Finally, they reached a massive iron door set into raw stone. Vera stood before it, flanked by torch-bearing soldiers. The rules are simple, she announced. Beyond this door is the maze. Your objective is to retrieve one of these. She held up a small bronze disc inscribed with Kael's sigil. From the center chamber and return to this door. First 3 back advance. Everyone else is eliminated. What happens to the eliminated ones? Mira asked nervously. If you make it back without a token, you're exiled from the fortress. If you don't make it back, Vera's smile was sharp. Well, the mountain provides. Cole swore under his breath. Another tribute, a tall girl with a vicious scar across her face, cracked her knuckles and looked entirely too eager. You have until sundown, Vera continued. That's 12 hours. No weapons beyond what you can scavenge inside. No help from the outside. And no killing each other directly. The king wants to see who's clever, not who's the best murderer. Though accidents do happen in the dark. She pulled a lever. The iron door groaned open, revealing absolute blackness beyond. Begin. The tributes surged forward as one. Seren held back, letting the others rush ahead into the darkness, their footsteps echoing and then fading. She counted to 30, then stepped through the threshold. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that made her stomach drop. For a moment, she stood in complete darkness, listening. Water dripped somewhere to her left. Something shuffled in the distance, claws on stone. The air smelled of earth and decay and ancient, patient hunger. She pulled out Thea's phosphor powder, mixed a tiny amount with water from her canteen, and watched it flare to life in her palm, a soft blue glow that pushed back the darkness about 10 feet in every direction. The tunnel stretched in 3 directions. The rightmost path showed scuff marks and fresh footprints. The other tributes had gone that way. The left path was smaller, barely wide enough for one person. The center path sloped distinctly downward. Follow the air currents down. Seren held up her glowing palm and felt a faint breeze coming from the center path. She took a breath and started walking. The maze was a nightmare of twisting passages and false turns. Twice, Seren had to backtrack when paths ended in collapsed tunnels or sheer drops into darkness. Once, she heard screaming echoing from somewhere above her, one of the other tributes, she assumed. The screaming stopped abruptly. She kept moving down. The phosphor light lasted exactly as long as Thea had promised. When it began to fade, Seren was at a junction where 4 tunnels met. She mixed another small batch and pressed on, following the steady downward slope and the increasingly cold air. Then she heard it, breathing that wasn't her own. She froze, killing her light instantly by closing her fist around it. In the sudden darkness, she heard the breathing more clearly, deep, rhythmic, close. Something was hunting her. She forced herself to stay absolutely still, barely breathing, while her mind raced. The sedative vial was in her pocket, but she'd need to get close enough to administer it. Her curse could work, but she'd have to touch whatever was out there. Both options required seeing the threat first. Very slowly, she opened her palm just enough to let a sliver of blue light escape. 10 feet away, blocking the downward path, was a dire wolf. It was massive, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with matted black fur and eyes that reflected her light like mirrors. Saliva dripped from its jaws. It hadn't attacked yet because it was smart enough to study its prey first, determine if she was alone, if she had weapons. Seren's hand moved to her pocket, fingers closing around the sedative vial. If she could throw it hard enough to break the glass near the wolf's face, maybe the fumes would... The wolf lunged. Seren threw herself sideways, hitting the tunnel wall hard. The wolf's jaws snapped shut inches from her leg. She scrambled backward, pulling out the vial and hurling it at the creature's snout. The glass shattered, liquid sprayed across the wolf's face, and it yelped, shaking its head violently. But it didn't go down. Thea had said the sedative needed to get in the system, not just on it. The wolf recovered and advanced again, more cautious now but no less intent on making her its next meal. Seren backed up until she hit stone, a dead end. The wolf stalked closer, its growl vibrating through the floor. She had one option left. She held up her glowing hand and waited. The wolf pounced. Seren lunged forward to meet it, driving her hand directly into the creature's open mouth. Silver light exploded like lightning in the confined space. The wolf's howl turned into a scream as her curse flooded its system, burning from the inside out. It thrashed wildly, slamming her against the walls, but she held on, pouring everything she had into the contact. The wolf collapsed. Seren fell with it, gasping, her hand scorched and bleeding from the creature's teeth, but alive. Alive. She lay there for a moment, catching her breath, then forced herself upright. The tunnel ahead was clear. She could still feel air moving downward. She kept going. Hours blurred together. The tunnels grew narrower, the air colder. Seren lost track of time in the darkness, marking her progress only by the amount of phosphor powder she had left. Not much. Then the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. It was circular, maybe 50 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. In the very center, on a raised stone pedestal, sat a bronze disc glowing faintly in the ambient light of luminescent moss growing on the walls. A token. Seren approached cautiously, every instinct screaming that this was too easy. She circled the pedestal twice, looking for traps, tripwires, anything. But there was nothing obvious. She reached for the token. The floor beneath the pedestal collapsed. Seren threw herself backward as the entire center of the chamber fell away, revealing a pit easily 20 feet deep. And at the bottom, reflected in the moss light, were bones. So many bones. The token sat on the pedestal, which was now suspended over the pit by nothing, some kind of illusion or force she couldn't see but was clearly there, holding it up. She stared at the impossible architecture. Kale hadn't just made this trial difficult. He'd made it require trust in things that seemed impossible. Slowly, carefully, Seren extended one foot onto the seemingly empty air beyond the pit's edge. It held. Her heart hammering, she took another step, then another, walking on invisible stone above a pit of death, following nothing but faith that the path existed. When she reached the pedestal, she grabbed the token and sprinted back to solid ground, not stopping until she was pressed against the far wall, the bronze disc clutched in her shaking hands. She'd done it. She'd actually... Footsteps echoed from one of the entry tunnels. Another tribute was coming. Seren shoved the token into her shirt and ran for the exit tunnel opposite where she'd entered. Behind her, she heard a male voice shout in triumph, then scream as he presumably tried to reach the pedestal without knowing about the invisible bridge. She didn't look back. The journey to the surface was a desperate race against time and exhaustion. Seren's phosphor powder ran out completely, leaving her to navigate by touch and memory, following the upward-sloping paths and praying they led to the iron door. She encountered 2 more dire wolves and a nest of cave vipers, avoiding the former by sheer luck and the latter by moving so quietly they never woke. Her legs screamed with fatigue. Her lungs burned. The burns on her hands from the wolf's teeth had started to fester, making every movement agony. But she kept climbing. When she finally saw torchlight filtering down from above, she nearly sobbed with relief. She staggered up the last 100 yards and collapsed against the iron door, pounding on it with her good hand. It opened. Vera stood there, flanked by guards, her expression inscrutable. "Token." Seren pulled it from her shirt with trembling fingers. Vera examined it, nodded, and stepped aside. "You're the second to return. Get to the infirmary. You look half dead." "Who was first?" Seren managed to ask as she stumbled through the doorway. "The Corvin girl. Got out 2 hours ago." Vera's eyes narrowed. "Barely had a scratch on her. You look like you fought the entire maze." "Just the parts that tried to eat me," Seren muttered. The infirmary was blessedly warm. The same healer from yesterday took one look at Seren's mangled hands and swore creatively. "What did you fight? A bear? Dire wolf. With your hands." "Didn't have much choice." Seren gritted her teeth as the healer cleaned the wounds. "Is that normal? For tributes to come back this injured?" "Most don't come back at all, girl. You should be grateful you've got hands left to complain about." The healer wrapped clean bandages around the burns and punctures. "There. Try not to use them for a few days. The final trial's tomorrow." "Then I guess you'll be competing one-handed. Wouldn't be the strangest thing I've seen in these trials." By sundown, only 3 tributes had returned with tokens: Rena Corvin, Seren, and a brutal-looking beta named Gregor who'd apparently killed a cave bear with a broken stalagmite in his bare hands. The other 7, including both Cole and Mira, never emerged. The survivors were given private quarters, a proper meal, and strict orders to rest. The final trial would be announced in the morning. Seren lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her bandaged hands throbbing. 2 trials down, 1 to go. Whatever Kael had planned for the finale, it would be the worst yet. Tests got harder, not easier. That was the whole point. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Thea stood over her, looking grim. "Get up, quietly." "What's wrong?" "Everything." Thea helped her sit up. "The final trial was just announced. It's not what we thought. It's not combat or survival." "Then what is it?" Thea's expression was somewhere between pity and horror. "It's Kael. The final trial is Kael himself." Seren's blood went cold. "What does that mean?" "It means," a deep voice said from the doorway, making them both jump, "that the 3 of you will spend the night of the full moon locked in the same chamber as me. And whoever survives until dawn wins everything." Kael stepped into the room, and even in the dim light, Seren could see something wrong with him. His eyes were too bright, almost fevered. His movements were tighter, more controlled, like he was holding himself together through sheer will. "The full moon is tomorrow night," he continued, his voice rough. "And I don't remain myself when it rises. You'll be given protective measures, enchanted collars that should keep you alive as long as you wear them. Should being the operative word. They fail sometimes." "You're cursed," Seren breathed. Kael's smile was terrible. "We're all cursed, little Omega. I'm just more honest about mine." He turned to leave, then paused. "Get some rest. Tomorrow night you'll see what a real monster looks like." The door closed behind him. Thea and Seren stared at each other in the oppressive silence. "You can't do this," Thea whispered. "No one survived the final trial in 3 years. The last person who tried, we found pieces of them scattered across the entire chamber." "I don't have a choice," Seren said quietly. It's this or death anyway. There's always a choice. Not for people like me. Seren looked down at her bandaged hands, at the silver glow that even thick wrappings couldn't quite hide. I've been surviving impossible things my whole life, Thea. What's one more? This isn't survival. This is execution with extra steps. Maybe. Seren met her eyes. Or maybe I know something everyone else doesn't. What? Seren thought about the arena, about touching Kael's wrist and seeing something shift in his expression, about the way he'd called her curse interesting instead of abomination. I think, she said slowly, that Kael Draven isn't looking for someone who can fight him. He's looking for someone who can survive him. And maybe, just maybe, my curse is exactly what he needs. Thea shook her head. You're either brilliant or insane. I've been hearing that a lot lately. Seren lay back down, exhaustion pulling at her. Wake me if anything else apocalyptic happens tonight. Otherwise, I need to rest. Seren, I know. Trust me. I know. She closed her eyes. But I didn't come here to die. And I'm not starting now. Thea left without another word, and Seren was alone again with her thoughts and the approaching full moon and the terrible certainty that tomorrow night she'd face something far worse than dire wolves or impossible mazes. She'd face the monster everyone had been warning her about since the day she was born. The only difference was, this time she was walking into its den on purpose. The day of the full moon dawned gray and oppressive, the sky choked with clouds that seemed to press down on the fortress like a physical weight. Seren woke to find a black velvet box sitting on the table beside her bed. Inside, nestled in silk, was a collar. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Worked silver inlaid with symbols she didn't recognize, attached to a band of supple leather. A small card lay beneath it, written in sharp, angular script. Wear this or die. Your choice. She picked up this collar with her bandaged hands, studying the craftsmanship. The silver work was intricate, almost alive, the symbols seeming to shift when she looked at them directly. Magic. Real, actual magic worked into metal by someone who knew what they were doing. A knock at the door. Thea entered without waiting for permission, her expression haunted. You got yours too? She asked, gesturing at the collar. What is it supposed to do? Theoretically, create a barrier between you and Kael when he transforms. The magic recognizes aggression and activates automatically. Thea sat heavily on the edge of the bed. In practice, it works about 60% of the time. The other 40%, the magic overloads or the beast is strong enough to break through anyway. Those are terrible odds. I know. Thea ran her hands through her copper hair. Seren, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about your curse being what Kael needs. What if you're right? What if you took off the collar during the trial? Seren stared at her. That would be suicide. Would it? You touched him in the arena and he didn't die. He barely even slowed down. What if your curse and his curse, I don't know, cancel each other out somehow? What if that's what he's been looking for all these years? Someone whose poison matches his? That's insane. So is everything else about this situation? Thea leaned forward urgently. Listen to me. Kael's been cursed for 7 years. 7 years of full moons where he loses himself completely and becomes something that kills everything in reach. Do you know how many people he's had to execute because they got too close during a transformation? How many friends, allies, soldiers who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Seren's mind raced. He's looking for a cure. He's looking for someone who can survive him long enough to bring him back. The trials aren't about finding warriors or strategists. They're about finding someone strong enough, crazy enough, or cursed enough to stand in the same room as a monster and not die. Thea gripped Seren's shoulders. You might be the only person alive who has a chance. Or I might be the only person stupid enough to try. Probably both. Thea released her and stood. The choice is yours. Wear the collar and pray it holds. Or take it off and gamble everything on your curse being stronger than his. She left before Seren could respond, leaving her alone with the collar and a decision that would probably kill her either way. They gathered in the great hall as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Seren, Rena Corvine, and Gregor, the 3 survivors. Kael stood before his throne, flanked by Commander Vaira and a dozen high-ranking officers. The entire fortress seemed to have turned out to witness the final trial. Wolves packed into every available space, their faces eager and hungry for blood. "The rules are simple," Kael announced, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. "You three will be sealed in the transformation chamber with me when the moon rises. You will wear the protective collars. You will survive until dawn, approximately 10 hours. The first to remove their collar or flee the chamber is eliminated. The last one standing when the sun rises wins." "What do we win?" Rena asked boldly. She was tall and lean, with ice-blue eyes, and the confidence of someone who'd never faced anything she couldn't kill. Kael's smile was sharp. "Everything. A position in my inner circle. Wealth. Authority. The knowledge that you survived something that's killed dozens of others." He paused. "And my respect, for whatever that's worth." "What happens if all three of us die?" Gregor rumbled. He was built like a wall, all muscle and scar tissue, with a voice like grinding stone. "Then there's no winner this year, and we try again next time." Kael descended from the dais, moving among them like a shark through water. "But I have faith in you. You've proven yourselves clever and resilient. You might actually last longer than the last batch." "How long did they last?" Seren asked quietly. Kael stopped in front of her, those burning gold eyes meeting her silver ones. 4 hours. Though to be fair, one of them died in the first 5 minutes because his collar malfunctioned. The other 2 lasted until I tore through the barrier and ripped them apart. The hall had gone silent. Even the bloodthirsty spectators seemed unsettled by the casual way he discussed murder. "Any other questions?" When none came, Kael nodded. "Good. The chamber is in the lowest level of the fortress. You'll be escorted down at sunset. I'll join you when the transformation begins." He looked at each of them in turn. "I genuinely hope at least one of you survives. I'm tired of cleaning blood off those walls." He swept out of the hall, leaving them with Vera and the weight of approaching nightfall. The transformation chamber was exactly as horrific as Seren had imagined. It was a circular room carved from solid rock, 50 feet across, with walls reinforced by iron and what looked like more of those magic symbols. The ceiling was 30 feet high, and the floor was scored with deep gouges, claw marks that had torn through stone. 3 chairs sat equidistant around the room's perimeter, each one fitted with restraints. Not for them, Seren realized, for Kael. "Sit," Vera commanded. "The restraints will release automatically once the moon rises and the transformation completes. Until then, you stay in those chairs. Understood?" They sat. Attendants secured the protective collars around their necks. Seren felt the magic activate immediately, a tingling sensation that spread across her skin like static electricity. The attendants retreated quickly, sealing the massive iron door behind them with a boom that echoed like a death knell. Then they waited. Rena sat rigid in her chair, her eyes fixed on the door set into the far wall, the one Kael would enter through. Gregor flexed his massive hands repeatedly, working out nervous energy. Seren closed her eyes and tried to slow her racing heart. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've survived everything else. You can survive this." The sun set. Through a narrow slit high in the wall, Seren watched the sky darken from gray to purple to black. And then, the moon rose. She felt it like a physical thing, a pressure in her bones and blood. The magic in her collar flared brighter, creating a faint shimmer in the air around her. Across the room, Rena and Gregor's collars did the same. The far door opened. Kael walked in and Seren's breath caught. He was shirtless, his torso a map of scars old and new, and his eyes were no longer gold. They were black, pure black from edge to edge, like pools of tar. "It's starting," he said, his voice strained. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, remember that I can't control it. I won't even remember it afterward. So if you die—" His jaw clenched, muscles jumping. "Don't take it personally." He crossed to the center of the room where chains hung from the ceiling and floor. He secured them to iron cuffs around his wrists and ankles, then looked at them one last time. "Good luck." Then the transformation took him. It started with his bones. Seren heard them breaking, restructuring, the sound like branches snapping in a storm. Kael screamed, a raw, agonized sound that tore at something primal in her chest. His body convulsed, muscles bulging and shifting beneath skin that began to split and reform. Fur erupted across his shoulders and back, black as midnight and coarse as wire. His face elongated, jaw cracking and extending into a muzzle filled with teeth that belonged in nightmares. His hands became claws, each digit tipped with talons that gleamed like polished obsidian. The chains held for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he tore free. The creature that had been Kyle Draven stood 9 feet tall, a horrific fusion of man and wolf and something else entirely, something ancient and wrong. It threw back its head and howled, a sound that made every wolf in the fortress above instinctively submit, pressing themselves flat against whatever surface they could find. Then it turned those empty black eyes on the 3 tributes. And it charged. Gregor was closest. The beast hit his barrier first, and there was a flash of light as magic met curse. The barrier held, barely. The creature rebounded, snarling in frustration, then struck again, and again. Each impact made the barrier flicker. "The collars won't hold!" Rena shouted over the creature's roars. "We need to move!" She bolted from her chair, running for the far side of the chamber. The beast's attention snapped to the movement. It abandoned Gregor and went after her, impossibly fast, crossing the space in 3 bounding strides. Rena's barrier flared as the creature slammed into it. She screamed, falling backward. The beast circled her, testing the barrier with claws and teeth, looking for weaknesses. Seren remained perfectly still in her chair, her mind racing. The creature was intelligent, not human intelligent, but hunting intelligent. It recognized the barriers as obstacles and was systematically working to break through them. How long until it succeeded? Minutes? Hours? Gregor rose from his chair and charged the beast from behind, roaring a challenge. The creature spun and batted him aside like a child's toy. Gregor hit the wall hard enough to crack stone, his barrier flashing dangerously. The beast stalked toward him for the kill. Seren made her decision. She reached up and unclasped her collar. The magic dissipated instantly, leaving her completely exposed. The creature's head snapped around, those void black eyes locking onto her. It could sense the difference, sense that this prey was now vulnerable. It abandoned Gregor and Rena, focusing entirely on Seren. "What are you doing?" Rena shrieked. "Put it back on!" But Seren stood slowly, letting the collar fall to the floor with a soft clink. She held up her hands, watching silver light begin to glow beneath her bandages. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's see which curse is stronger." The beast charged. Seren didn't run. She stood her ground as 9 feet of nightmare bore down on her, waiting, waiting. The creature's claws raked across her shoulder and chest. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and absolute. But at the same instant, silver light erupted from the wounds, flooding into the beast where its claws had penetrated her skin. The creature screamed. It jerked back, staring at its claws as silver fire ate through them like acid. The damage spread rapidly, up its arms, across its chest, consuming the cursed flesh. Where the silver light touched, the monstrous form began to recede, revealing human skin beneath. Seren collapsed to her knees, blood pouring from the deep gashes. But she saw it happening, saw Kyle emerging from the beast like a man rising from dark water. "It's working," she gasped. "It's actually working." The beast howled in fury and pain, thrashing wildly. But wherever her blood had touched it, the transformation was reversing. The muzzle shortened, the claws retracted, the black eyes flickered with gold. Then the silver light sputtered and died. The transformation stopped halfway. The creature stood frozen, caught between forms, partly human, partly monster. Its eyes cleared enough to show recognition, confusion, horror. "Seren!" Kale's voice emerged from the creature's throat, distorted but present. What did you do?" "Saved you," she managed, pressing her hands to the wounds in her chest. "Or killed us both. Haven't decided which yet." The hybrid form staggered, fighting for control. Seren could see the internal battle playing out, man versus beast, cursed versus cursed. And she'd shifted the balance just enough to make it a fair fight instead of a slaughter. But she was bleeding out fast. The world was starting to tilt and fade at the edges. "Need more contact," she whispered. "More blood to finish it." "No." Kyle's voice was stronger now, more human. "You'll die." "Already dying." She looked up at him, at the terrible beauty of his half-transformed state, caught between monster and man. Finish it, please. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Kael extended one clawed hand toward her throat. Rena screamed. Gregor shouted something Seren didn't hear. Kael's claws touched her neck, and Seren grabbed his wrist with both hands, pouring everything she had left into the contact. Silver light detonated like a star. The explosion of magic threw Rena and Gregor against the walls, their barriers barely protecting them from the backwash. The walls themselves cracked, symbols flaring so bright they burned afterimages into the watcher's vision. And at the center of it all, Seren and Kael remained locked together, curse meeting curse, in a collision that threatened to tear the mountain apart. Seren felt it happening inside her, felt her curse being pulled out like poison from a wound, channeling through her hands into Kael's body. Every drop of silver blood in her veins ignited, burning through her system and into his. It was agony. It was transcendent. It was dying and being born and being unmade all at once. And Kael screamed. The beast form shredded away like paper in fire. Fur burned to ash. Claws retracted. Bones restructured one final time. The curse that had held him for 7 years broke like chains made of glass. When the light finally faded, they collapsed together onto the blood-slicked floor. Kael was human again. Completely, totally human. His eyes were gold again, not black. His hands were hands, not claws. His body was his own. And Seren wasn't breathing. No. Kael gathered her into his arms, his hands coming away red with her blood. No, you don't get to die. You don't. Vera! Get the healers, now! The door burst open. Vera and a squad of wolves poured in, stopping short at the sight before them. The king, freed from his curse, cradling the broken body of the Omega who'd sacrificed everything to save him. She's not breathing, Kael said, and for the first time since Seren had met him, she heard something like fear in his voice. Fix her, now! The healers swarmed forward, pulling Seren from his arms despite his snarl of protest. They worked frantically, stopping the bleeding, forcing air into her lungs, pumping potions and antidotes into what remained of her blood. She's lost too much, one healer said desperately. I can't. There's nothing left to work with. Then give her mine, Kael commanded, already pulling a knife from one of the guards. He slashed his own wrist open before anyone could stop him, letting his blood flow into Seren's mouth. If her curse broke mine, maybe my blood can save her. Do it! They did. For 10 agonizing minutes, they worked, forcing Kael's blood into Seren's system, manually pumping her heart, breathing for her. And slowly, impossibly, her chest began to rise and fall on its own. Color returned to her gray face. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Kael sat back, his own blood still dripping from his wrist, and laughed, a raw, broken sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. She did it, he said to no one in particular. That insane, brilliant girl actually did it. Vera stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Kael with wide eyes. My king, the curse, you're free. He looked down at his hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. For the first time in 7 years, I'm free. Around them, wolves began to gather, drawn by the commotion. They stared in silence at their king, curse-free, human, and covered in the blood of the Omega who'd saved him. What happened? Someone whispered. She took off her collar, Rena said, her voice shaking. She was still pressed against the far wall, her own collar hanging loose. She let him strike her. She poisoned him with her curse, and it broke his. That's impossible, another wolf said. We all saw it, Gregor rumbled. The cursed girl cured the cursed king, with nothing but her blood and her courage. Kael looked at Seren's unconscious form, now being carefully lifted onto a stretcher. Her hands were scorched black from the release of power. Her chest was a ruin of claw marks. Her face was peaceful in a way he'd never seen it. She'd come to his fortress as a tribute, a sacrifice meant to die in his trials. Instead, she'd done what 7 years of magic users, healers, and scholars couldn't do. She'd freed him from his monster, and in doing so, she'd become something impossible herself, no longer just cursed, but transformed. He could see it in the faint glow that still lingered beneath her skin, different now. Changed. The silver was still there, but it pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat instead of burning constantly. "Where are you taking her?" he asked the healers. "The healing ward. She needs—" "No. My chambers. Private, guarded. No one enters without my permission." He stood, every muscle in his body protesting. "And get me a healer who knows about curses. She risked everything to save me. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she survives." "Yes, my king." They carried Seren away, leaving Kael standing in the destroyed chamber surrounded by his wolves. They were all staring at him, some with joy, some with fear, some with calculation already forming behind their eyes. "Commander Vera," he said quietly. "My king?" "Send word to every pack in the highlands. The trials are over. We have a winner." He looked at the collar Seren had discarded, lying in a pool of her blood. "And things are about to change around here." 3 days passed. Seren woke in darkness, every nerve in her body screaming. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her chest and arms, so intense she gasped. "Don't move." A cool hand pressed gently against her shoulder. "You've been out for 3 days. Your body is still healing." She recognized the voice, the head healer from the infirmary. Through the haze of pain, she forced her eyes open. She was in a massive bed surrounded by furs and pillows. Torches burned in sconces along stone walls hung with rich tapestries. This wasn't the healing ward. This was somewhere much more luxurious. "Where?" Her voice came out as a rasp, barely audible. "The king's chambers." He insisted. The healer held a cup to her lips. "Drink. It'll help with the pain." Seren drank, some kind of bitter tea that made her tongue go numb. The pain receded to a manageable level. "What happened?" she managed. "You don't remember?" The healer looked surprised. "You broke the king's curse, completely. Used your own blood to burn it out of him. Nearly killed you both in the process." Memories flooded back. The bees, the decision, the explosion of silver light. "Did it work?" "See for yourself." The door opened. Kael walked in, and Seren's breath caught. He looked different, lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't realized he'd been carrying had been lifted. His eyes were clear gold, warm instead of burning. And when he moved, there was an ease to it. The tension that had hummed beneath his skin was gone. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. He dismissed the healer with a gesture and sat on the edge of the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I got torn apart by a monster," Seren said honestly. "Fair assessment." He reached for her hand, then stopped, uncertainty crossing his features. "Can I—" She extended her bandaged hand. He took it gently. No burning, no pain, just warmth. "The curse is different now," Kael said quietly. "Changed. The healers think you didn't destroy it so much as transform it. It's still there, in your blood, but it's not poison anymore. It's something else." "What?" "They're not sure yet, but whatever it is," he met her eyes. "It saved my life, saved my sanity, saved this entire fortress from 7 more years of me losing myself every full moon." "The full moon," Seren said suddenly. "It's been 3 days. That means—" "It passed. I stayed human the entire time." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "Do you have any idea what that means?" "I can think again. Plan. Remember things that happen at night. I'm not a prisoner in my own body anymore." Seren looked at their joined hands, at the way his fingers intertwined with hers without burning. "What happens now?" "Now," Kael said, "you heal. And then we figure out what you've become. Because whatever transformation happened to you when you broke my curse, you're not the same Omega who walked into that chamber." As if to prove his point, Seren looked down at her free hand. Silver light pulsed beneath the bandages, but it was different now, controlled, responding to her will instead of burning constantly. "The fortress is calling you the Lightbringer," Kael said with a slight smile. "The Omega who cured the cursed king. You're famous. Every pack in the highlands wants to know who you are." "I'm no one," Seren said automatically. "You were no one." Kael stood looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Now you're the girl who did the impossible, and that makes you very dangerous to a lot of people." Before she could ask what he meant, the door burst open. Vera stood there, her face ashen. "My king!" We have a problem. The Southern Territories just sent word. They're calling Seren an abomination, a corruption. They're demanding we execute her or they'll consider it an act of war. The warmth drained from Kael's expression, replaced by ice. Let them come. My king. I said let them come. He turned back to Seren, and she saw murder in his eyes, not directed at her, but at anyone who would dare threaten her. If they want war over the Omega who saved my life, they'll get it, but they'll regret it. Seren's heart sank as she understood. She'd survived the trials. She'd broken the curse. She'd done the impossible, and now the whole world was coming for her. The Southern Territories came 3 weeks later, but they didn't come with armies. They came with words wrapped in ceremony, led by an ancient wolf named Elder Cassius, who'd ruled the Bloodstone Confederacy for 40 years. He arrived at the gates of Frostmark Citadel with a retinue of 20 wolves, all wearing formal robes marked with the crimson seal of the Southern Pax. Seren watched from the window of Kael's chambers as they approached, her hands, still bandaged but healing, pressed against the cold glass. She'd been confined to the upper levels for her own protection while her body mended. The wounds across her chest had scarred in strange patterns, silver lines that glowed faintly when she breathed deeply. The healers said they'd never seen anything like it. They're here to kill you, Thea said from the doorway. She'd been assigned as Seren's personal guard, much to Vera's irritation. Or take you back south for trial. Either way, they want you gone. I know. Seren didn't turn from the window. What I don't know is why Kael's letting them in. Because refusing them would be an admission that he's protecting you out of weakness rather than choice. He has to face them. Has to show that keeping you alive is a position of strength, not sentiment. Thea moved to stand beside her. But that means you'll have to face them too. Prove you're not an abomination. How do I prove I'm not something everyone's decided I am? You show them what you can do now, what you've become. Thea gestured at Seren's hands. The healers say your curse has transformed into something else, so transform something. Show them you're not a walking death sentence anymore. Seren looked down at her bandaged hands. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd been practicing in secret, learning to control the silver light that pulsed beneath her skin. It no longer burned everything it touched. Instead, it seemed to respond to her intent, her emotion. When she was calm, it was gentle, warm instead of searing. When she was afraid or angry, it flared hotter, but she hadn't tested it on anyone except herself. She had no idea what it would do to another living being. What if it still kills? She asked quietly. Then we'll deal with that. But hiding up here won't change their minds. You need to face them, Seren. Show them the girl who broke a 7-year curse isn't someone to be afraid of. She's someone to respect. Before Seren could respond, the door opened and Kael entered, dressed in formal armor that made him look every inch the conquering king. His eyes found her immediately. They're demanding an audience, he said without preamble. The entire council. They want to see you, evaluate you, and determine whether you're a threat to the natural order of the Pax. And if they decide I am? Then they'll demand your execution or exile, and I'll tell them to go to hell. Kael crossed to her, his presence filling the room. But I'd rather not start a war over this if we can avoid it. So I need you to do something for me. What? Come to the council. Face them. Let them see you're not a monster. He paused, his jaw tightening. And show them what you can do now, because if they understand that your transformation isn't a curse anymore, if they see it as something valuable instead of dangerous, they'll have a harder time calling for your death. Seren's pulse quickened. You want me to demonstrate my abilities in front of the people who want me dead? I want you to prove them wrong. Kael's voice softened slightly. You did the impossible once already. Do it again. Yet, the Great Hall had been transformed into a formal council chamber, with representatives from 17 territories seated in a semicircle facing the throne. Elder Cassius sat at the center, his fur gone completely silver with age, but his eyes still sharp as flint. To his right sat leaders from the Eastern Pax, their expressions carefully neutral. To his left, the Western representatives wore open hostility on their faces. Seren entered behind Kael, and every head turned. The silence was immediate and suffocating. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders. These were the people who decided who lived and died in the Highlands. These were the rulers who could order entire packs wiped out with a word, and they were all staring at her like she was a disease. "King Draven," Elder Cassius said, his voice dry as old parchment, "thank you for granting us this audience. We have traveled far to address a matter of grave concern." "You've traveled far to threaten one of my people," Kael corrected, settling into his throne with deliberate ease. "Let's not pretend this is anything else." Murmurs rippled through the representatives. Cassius's expression didn't change. "The Omega you harbor is an anomaly," he continued, "a violation of natural law. Her existence threatens the stability of pack hierarchies across the highlands." "Her existence saved my life," Kael said flatly. "She broke a curse that your best healers and magic users couldn't even understand, let alone cure. I'd say that makes her valuable, not threatening." "She broke your curse by corrupting you," a Western representative snarled, a burly man named Torin who led the Iron Peak pack. "Who knows what taint she's left in your blood? You could be compromised, King Draven, weakened." Kael's smile was dangerous. "Would you like to test that theory, Torin? Step forward and we'll see how weakened I am." Torin paled and said nothing more. Cassius raised a hand for silence. "The concern is not your strength, King Draven, but the precedent this sets. If we allow cursed Omegas to live, to thrive even, what message does that send? That corruption is acceptable as long as it serves a purpose?" "It sends the message," Seren said clearly, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "that survival isn't about purity, it's about adaptation." Every eye turned to her. She stepped forward, ignoring the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "You call me corrupted," she continued, "an abomination, a threat. But what am I really? I'm a girl who was born different and learned to live with it. I didn't choose my curse any more than King Draven chose his, but when the opportunity came to use my difference to save a life, to break a cycle of violence that had plagued this fortress for 7 years, I took it. And in doing so, you violated natural law," an Eastern representative said coldly. She was a severe-looking woman named Marta, leader of the Stoneclaw pack. "Curses are not meant to be broken by other curses. That's corruption building on corruption." "Is it?" Seren held up her hands, letting the bandages fall away. Silver light pulsed beneath her skin, but it was controlled now, rhythmic, almost beautiful. "Or is it transformation? Evolution? The creation of something new from something broken?" She extended one hand toward a potted plant on a nearby table, decorative greenery that had been wilting in the dim hall. She focused, letting the silver light flow from her palm toward the plant. The room held its breath. The light touched the leaves, and instead of burning them to ash, it sank in like water into soil. The wilting plant straightened, new growth erupted from dead stems. Flowers bloomed in rapid succession, filling the air with fragrance. Then Seren pulled her hand back, and the light retreated, leaving the plant vibrant and alive. Silence. "My curse doesn't kill anymore," Seren said quietly. "It transforms. It takes what's dying and gives it new life. That's what it did to King Draven's curse, burned away the corruption and left him whole. That's what it can do to anything I touch, if I will it." "Impossible," Marta breathed. "No curse has ever—" "This one has." Kael stood, moving to Seren's side. "I've seen it myself repeatedly over the past 3 weeks. She's healed wounds that should have festered, restored plants that were dead, even purified water that had been poisoned." He looked at each council member in turn. "Tell me, how is that a threat? How is the ability to heal and restore something to be feared?" "Because it's unnatural," Torin insisted. "And what's unnatural is dangerous." "Then I'm dangerous too," Kael said coldly. "I was cursed for 7 years with something that made me a monster every full moon. By your logic, I should have been executed the moment the curse took hold. But you didn't call for my death. You accepted it because I was powerful enough to make you accept it." He let that sink in, then continued. "Seren Vale is different now, yes. Changed. But that change saved me, and it could save others. The question isn't whether she's natural or not. It's whether you're wise enough to see the value in what she's become, instead of being too afraid to look past what she was." The council erupted in argument. Some supported Kael's position. Others doubled down on their demands for Seren's removal. Elder Cassius sat silent through it all, his ancient eyes studying Seren with unnerving intensity. Finally, he raised his hand again, and the room fell quiet. A demonstration, he said. If the Omega's abilities are truly as you claim, if they heal rather than harm, then she should be able to prove it beyond reviving a plant. He gestured to one of his attendants, who stepped forward with a small cage. Inside was a bird, a raven with a broken wing, the bone jutting through feathers at an unnatural angle. This bird was injured 3 days ago, Cassius said. It will die from the wound within the week. Infection has already set in. If your Omega can heal it, truly heal it, then perhaps we will reconsider our position. It was a test, a trap, possibly. If Seren failed, they'd use it as proof that her powers were unreliable, that she was still dangerous. If she succeeded but the bird died later, they'd claim she'd only delayed the inevitable. But if she didn't try, they'd condemn her as a coward. Kael looked at her, the question clear in his eyes. Seren nodded slightly. She'd come this far. Might as well see it through. The attendant opened the cage and carefully extracted the raven, holding it out to Seren. The bird was weak, its breathing shallow, its eyes glazed with pain and fever. The broken wing hung limp, useless. Seren took the bird gently in her bandaged hands, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her palms. It tried to struggle but lacked the strength. She could feel the infection burning through its small body, see the way the break had damaged not just bone but muscle and tendon. This wasn't like the plant. This was a living creature in active pain, dying by degrees. She closed her eyes and let the silver light flow. It was different this time, more intense, more focused. She felt the light move through the bird's body like water finding cracks, seeking out the damaged areas. It found the infection first, burning through the corruption without harming healthy tissue. Then it moved to the break, knitting bone back together with careful precision. The bird's heartbeat slowed from panicked to steady. Its breathing deepened, and then it chirped. Seren opened her eyes. The raven was looking at her with clear, bright eyes. Its wing was whole again, the bone realigned and healed. As she watched, it flexed the wing experimentally, then more confidently. She opened her hands. The raven took flight, circling the hall once before landing on one of the high rafters, where it preened its feathers with evident satisfaction. The council sat in stunned silence. "That's not possible," Marta whispered. "Healing magic doesn't work that fast. Even the best healers take days to mend a break like that." "It's not healing magic," Cassius said slowly, his eyes still on the raven. "It's something else, something I've only read about in the oldest texts." He looked at Seren with what might have been wonder or fear. She couldn't tell which. "You're not cursed anymore, child. You're blessed, and that's far more dangerous." "Why?" Seren asked, genuinely confused. "If I can heal, if I can help people, why is that dangerous?" "Because," Cassius said heavily, "the last person who could do what you just did founded the first pack hierarchy 500 years ago. She used her abilities to heal the worthy and condemn the unworthy. She decided who deserved to live and who deserved to die based on her own judgment. And when she died, the packs went to war for 3 generations fighting over who had the right to decide such things." He stood, his ancient joints creaking. "You have the power to save lives, Omega, but you also have the power to play God, and that's a power no one should have." The implications crashed over Seren like a wave. She could heal, but she could also choose not to heal, could let someone die who might otherwise be saved, could pick and choose who was worthy of her intervention. That was power beyond any alpha's strength or king's authority. That was the power to reshape the world. "I don't want that," she said quietly. "I don't want to decide who lives and dies." "Then what do you want?" Cassius asked. Seren thought about her childhood in isolation, about her parents who loved her but couldn't touch her, about the pack that exiled her and the tributes who died in the trials, about Kael, freed from his curse, and Thea, who'd helped her survive. "I want to not be alone anymore," she said finally. "I want to use this," she gestured at her glowing hands, "to help people who need it, not to rule over them or judge them, just to help." "Noble sentiments," Torrin sneered, "but how long until you decide that help should come with conditions? How long until you're demanding payment or loyalty or worship in exchange for your healing?" "I won't," Seren said firmly. "You say that now, but power corrupts. Always." "Not always," Kael's voice cut through the tension. "I've had power for 7 years. And yes, I've made brutal choices." But I've never used my strength to terrorize the innocent or demand worship. I've used it to build something stable in a region that was tearing itself apart. Seren can do the same. With you controlling her, Marta said accusingly, using her as a weapon or a tool. I don't need her as a weapon. I have plenty of those. Kale moved to stand beside Seren, his presence solid and grounding. But I do need her alive. Because she represents something this fortress, something these highlands desperately needs. Which is? Hope. Kyle looked at the council members, his gaze unwavering. For 7 years, I've been a monster one night every month. For 7 years, this fortress has lived in fear of what I might do when the moon rose. And now that fear is gone, because one cursed Omega was brave enough to risk everything to break a cycle that seemed unbreakable. He paused. If she can do that, if she can take a curse and transform it into a gift, then maybe others can too. Maybe the outcasts and the broken and the ones you've all written off as useless or dangerous can become something more, something better. You're talking about revolution, Cassius said quietly, about overturning the order that's kept the pack stable for centuries. I'm talking about evolution, Kael countered, about adapting to survive, because the old order isn't working anymore. We've spent generations casting out anyone who doesn't fit the mold, and what has it gotten us? Weaker packs, more violence, more suffering. He gestured at Seren. This girl survived what should have killed her. She turned poison into healing. She did the impossible, and you want to execute her for it because she threatens your comfortable categories of worthy and unworthy. The hall erupted in heated argument again. But this time Seren noticed something different. Some of the representatives were nodding. Some were looking at her with curiosity instead of fear. The tide was shifting. Elder Cassius let the argument run for several minutes before calling for silence again. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. King Draven makes a compelling point. The Omega has demonstrated abilities that could be valuable. However, he raised a hand to forestall celebration. We cannot simply ignore the risks. If she is to remain here alive and free, there must be safeguards. What kind of safeguards? Kael asked warily. She must submit to regular evaluation by a council of healers and scholars. If her abilities begin to corrupt or twist toward harm, she must be contained immediately. Cassius looked directly at Seren. And she must never use her powers to coerce, manipulate, or control others. She heals freely or not at all. The moment she demands payment or loyalty in exchange for her gift, she becomes what we feared. Agreed? It was a compromise. Not perfect, but better than execution or exile. Seren looked at Kael, who gave her a slight nod. The choice was hers. Agreed, she said clearly. I heal freely. No conditions, no manipulation. I just want to help. Then we have an accord, Cassius said, and though his expression remained stern, Seren thought she detected a hint of approval in his eyes. The Omega may remain at Frostmark Citadel under King Draven's protection, but know this, child, we will be watching. And if you prove us wrong about you, if you become the tyrant we fear, there will be no mercy. I understand. The council session dissolved into smaller discussions and negotiations. Some representatives approached Kael to discuss terms. Others left in disgust, clearly unhappy with the decision. But the immediate threat had passed. Seren had survived. Again. That night, Kael found her on the battlements overlooking the valley. She was staring up at the stars, her hands, finally free of bandages, resting on the cold stone. You did well today, he said, joining her. I nearly killed that bird trying to heal it. Did you see how the light flared when I first touched it? Another second, and I would have burned through its heart. But you didn't. You controlled it. Kael leaned against the wall beside her. That's what matters. You're learning. Learning to play God, apparently. Seren's voice was bitter. Did you hear what Cassius said about the woman who could heal like I can? How she used it to decide who was worthy of life? I heard. And I also heard you tell them that's not who you are. Kael turned to face her. You could have demanded anything today. Wealth, status, power. They were afraid enough to give you almost anything to keep you docile. But you asked for nothing. You just wanted to help. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Seren looked at him, this king who'd been a monster and was now a man again because she'd been crazy enough to bleed for him. What happens now? Now we figure out what you can really do, how far your abilities extend, what their limits are. Kael's expression grew serious. Because Cassius was right about one thing. You have power now. Real power. The kind that can reshape the world or destroy it. We need to understand it before someone else tries to use it against you. Against us, Seren corrected. Whatever happens, we're in this together now, aren't we? We are. Kael smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. The cursed king and the blessed Omega. Quite the pair. They're already writing songs about it, Thea called from the doorway, making them both jump. She grinned unrepentantly. Sorry, but Vera wants you both. Apparently word spread about today's demonstration. There's a line of injured wolves at the gates asking for Seren's healing. Seren's eyes widened. A line. 30 people and counting, broken bones, festering wounds, old injuries that never healed right. They've come from all over the highlands. Thea's expression grew serious. This is what Cassius was afraid of. You just became the most valuable person in the territory. Everyone's going to want a piece of you now. Kael swore softly. Send them away. Tell them she's not a miracle dispenser they can line up for. Wait. Seren put a hand on his arm. What if that's exactly what I should be? Not a miracle dispenser, but someone who helps when she can. Isn't that what I said I wanted? Seren, if you start healing everyone who asks, you'll never stop. They'll wear you down to nothing. Then I'll set limits. A few people a day. The worst cases. The ones who need it most. She looked at Kael, her silver eyes determined. I told the council I wanted to use this gift to help people. Let me prove I meant it. Kael studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 5 people a day. Maximum. And Thea screens them first. Make sure they're genuine cases and not opportunists looking to exploit you. Deal. And you stop the moment you feel exhausted. No pushing yourself until you collapse. Agreed. And he paused, then smiled slightly. You remember to eat and sleep and take care of yourself too, because you're no good to anyone dead. I'll try. They stood there on the battlements, the 3 of them. The king freed from his curse, the Omega who'd transformed herself, and the scout who'd believed in both of them. Below, the fortress hummed with activity. Beyond the walls, the highlands stretched into darkness, full of people who would either embrace the change Seren represented or try to destroy it. But for now, in this moment, they'd won. They'd survived the council. They'd proved the impossible was possible. And tomorrow, they'd start building something new. The first person Seren healed was a little girl named Mina, 8 years old, with a twisted leg that had never set properly after a fall. Her mother carried her into the private healing room Kael had set up, tears streaming down her face. Please, the woman begged. The other healers said she'd never walk right, that she'd be crippled for life. But I heard what you did, what you can do. I'll try, Seren said gently. That's all I can promise. She took Mina's small hand in hers and let the silver light flow. It was easier this time, more controlled. She felt the bones that had healed crooked, the muscles that had atrophied from disuse. And slowly, carefully, she reshaped them, straightening bone, strengthening muscle, repairing damage that should have been permanent. When she finished, Mina stood on her own for the first time in 3 years and took a wobbling step, then another. Then she ran to her mother, sobbing with joy. The second was an old warrior who'd lost his eye in battle 20 years ago. Seren couldn't restore the eye. That was beyond her abilities, but she could heal the chronic pain that came with the injury, the headaches that had plagued him for decades. The third was a young wolf who'd been poisoned during a hunt, the toxin still lingering in her system months later. Seren drew it out, purifying blood and tissue until the girl could breathe without pain again. The fourth and fifth were similar. Injuries thought permanent, suffering thought eternal. And Seren healed them all. By the end of the first week, the line at the gates had grown to over 100 people. By the end of the second week, it was 300. Wolves traveled from the farthest reaches of the highlands just for a chance at Seren's healing. And slowly, grudgingly, the fear began to transform into something else. Respect. Not everyone accepted her. There were still those who called her an abomination, who insisted her powers were unnatural. But they were drowned out by the voices of those she'd helped, the parents whose children walked again, the warriors who'd been freed from chronic pain, the sick who'd been given their lives back. Seren Vale, the cursed Omega, who'd been exiled from her own pack, became Seren the Lightbringer, the healer who asked for nothing, the girl who'd transformed poison into power. And in the private moments between healings and council meetings and the endless stream of grateful people, she and Kael began to build something neither of them had expected, a partnership based not on curse or power, but on understanding, on two broken things that had found a way to become whole. "You're changing this place," Kael said one evening as they reviewed requests for healing. "The entire Highlands. People are starting to believe that different doesn't mean dangerous." "Good," Seren said, "because I'm tired of being feared for things I can't control." "You're in control now." Kael looked at her with something that might have been pride. "More than you know, and that terrifies some people." "Let them be terrified," Seren said quietly, her silver eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I spent my whole life being the one who was afraid. It's someone else's turn." Outside, the fortress hummed with activity. Inside, the cursed king and the blessed Omega made plans for a future where outcasts could become leaders, where curses could become gifts, and where a girl no one had wanted became the one everyone needed. The impossible had happened, and it was just the beginning. The attack came on the night of the winter solstice, when the fortress was celebrating its first curse-free year. Seren was in the healing chamber, treating a young wolf who'd been mauled by a bear, when the first explosion shook the walls. The bottles on her shelves rattled and crashed to the floor. Outside, alarm bells began to clang frantically. "What's happening?" the young wolf gasped, clutching his bandaged side. Seren moved to the window and looked out onto chaos. Fires burned in 3 different sections of the fortress. Wolves in unmarked black armor poured through a breach in the eastern wall, fighting viciously against Kael's defenders. And in the courtyard below, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Figures in white robes marked with red symbols, carrying torches and chanting. The Purists, an extremist faction that had been growing in the southern territories, preaching that cursed bloodlines needed to be purged entirely. She'd heard reports of their activities. Isolated attacks, murders disguised as accidents, villages burned for harboring corrupted wolves, but she'd never imagined they'd be bold enough to attack Frostmark itself. "Stay here," she commanded the injured wolf. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or the king." She ran into the corridor and nearly collided with Thea, who was sprinting toward her with a sword drawn. "We're under attack," Thea said urgently. "The Purists breached the eastern wall with explosives. They're targeting the healing wing, targeting you." "Where's Kael?" "Fighting at the main gate. They hit us from 3 sides simultaneously. It's coordinated." Thea grabbed Seren's arm. "We need to get you to the safe room, now." "No." Seren pulled free. "How many injured?" "What?" "Seren, we don't have time. How many?" Thea's expression twisted with frustration. "Dozens already. More coming in every minute. But the healers can handle it. You need to—" "The healers can't do what I can." Seren started running toward the main courtyard. "If the Purists came here to kill me, hiding won't stop them. They'll tear this fortress apart looking. But if I fight, if I use my abilities to save our people, maybe I can turn this around." "Seren, this is insane. I know." She burst through the doors into the courtyard and stopped short. It was carnage. Kael's wolves fought desperately against the black-armored invaders, while the white-robed Purists moved through the chaos, targeting anyone who'd been healed by Seren. She saw Mina's mother defending her daughter with a broken spear, saw the old warrior who'd lost his eye fighting with a ferocity that belied his age, and she saw them falling, one by one, overwhelmed. Something inside Seren ignited, not silver light, but pure rage. These people had come to her for help. She'd healed their children, eased their pain, given them hope. And now they were dying because extremists had decided that healing was corruption. "Enough!" Her voice rang out across the courtyard, amplified somehow by the power surging through her veins. Every head turned. The fighting stuttered to a halt as both sides stared at her. Seren stepped forward, and silver light erupted from her hands like twin stars. so bright that people had to shield their eyes. She felt the power differently now, not as something to be carefully controlled, but as something to be unleashed. "You came here for me," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "So here I am. Leave these people alone and face me." A figure emerged from the ranks of white-robed purists, a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. She carried no weapon, but power radiated from her like heat from a forge. "Seren Vale," the woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. "The abomination who corrupts our king and poisons our people with false healing. I am Mother Evangelist, and I speak for the pure bloodlines. Your existence is an affront to everything natural. Surrender, and your death will be quick." "My existence saved Kael Draven from a 7-year curse your pure bloodlines couldn't even understand, let alone cure," Seren shot back. "My abilities have healed hundreds of people your healers wrote off as hopeless. So forgive me if I don't particularly care what you think is natural." "You dare! I dare!" Seren took another step forward, the light around her hands intensifying. "You attack innocent people in the name of purity. You murder children for being different. You burn villages because you're too afraid to accept that maybe, just maybe, your rigid hierarchies are wrong." Evangelist's face twisted with fury. "Kill her. Kill them all." The purists surged forward as one, and Seren did something she'd never attempted before, something instinctive and desperate and completely insane. She slammed her hands against the ground and released everything. Silver light exploded outward in a wave, rolling across the courtyard like a tsunami. It hit the charging purists, and they didn't burn. They transformed. Seren felt it happening through the connection, felt her power diving into their bodies, seeking out the hatred and fear that fueled their extremism. And instead of destroying it, she changed it, rewrote it, forced them to feel what their victims had felt, the pain of rejection, the terror of being hunted, the desperate hope of finding healing. The purists collapsed, screaming, not in agony, but in understanding, in the sudden, overwhelming empathy that crashed through their certainties like a hammer through glass. When the light faded, they lay scattered across the courtyard, sobbing. Some clutched their heads, others stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Evangelist was the only one still standing, her face a mask of shock and horror. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I showed them the truth," Seren said, her voice shaking with exhaustion. "I showed them what it feels like to be the ones you condemn, to be different and afraid and desperate for someone, anyone, to see you as something other than a threat. You violated their minds, their very essence. You're a monster." "No." Kael's voice cut across the courtyard as he strode forward, blood-spattered but alive. "She's the future, and you're the past that refused to die peacefully." He stopped beside Seren, his presence solid and grounding. Around them, his wolves were disarming the black-armored invaders, who seemed suddenly lost without their purest leaders directing them. "Here's what's going to happen," Kael continued, addressing both the scattered purists and his own people. "You came here to kill an Omega for daring to heal people. You failed, spectacularly. And now you're going to spread a message for me." "What message?" Evangelist spat. "That Frostmark Citadel is now a sanctuary for outcasts, for cursed bloodlines, for anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. They can come here and be safe, be valued, be transformed into something more than the boxes you tried to shove them into." Kael's eyes burned gold in the firelight. "And if you or any other extremist faction attacks this place again, Seren won't just show you empathy, she'll show you what real corruption looks like." Boots. It was a bluff. Seren had no idea if she could actually corrupt someone intentionally, but Evangelist didn't know that. The woman stared at her with naked fear, then turned and fled, stumbling over fallen purists in her haste to escape. The black-armored invaders surrendered en masse. Kael's wolves rounded them up while healers rushed to tend the wounded. And Seren stood in the center of it all, still glowing faintly, and realized what she'd just done. She'd weaponized empathy, forced understanding on people who'd chosen hatred, changed them on a fundamental level without their consent. Cassius had been right to fear her. This was the power to reshape people's very nature, to decide what they believed, what they felt, what they became. She could be a healer or a tyrant, and the line between the two was thinner than she'd ever imagined. Seren. Kael's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. Are you all right? I don't know what I am anymore. She looked at her hands, still glowing with silver light. I changed them, Kael. Reached into their minds and forced them to understand. That's not healing. I don't even know what that is. It's evolution, a new voice said. They turned to find Elder Cassius standing at the edge of the courtyard, his retinue behind him. He must have been at the fortress for the solstice celebration. He approached slowly, studying the fallen purists with ancient, knowing eyes. I wondered if you'd discover that ability, he said quietly. The woman from the old texts. She could do it too. Force understanding, create empathy where none existed. He looked at Seren. The question is, what will you do with it now that you know you can? I won't use it again, Seren said immediately. It's too dangerous, too close to playing God, Cassius finished. Yes, but consider this. Those purists came here to commit mass murder. They would have killed children, invalids, anyone they deemed corrupted. You stopped them without killing a single one. You transformed hatred into understanding. Is that not a more merciful outcome than the slaughter they intended? It's still violation, Seren insisted. I took away their choice. They took away choice the moment they decided others didn't deserve to live. Cassius moved closer, his expression grave. I'm not saying what you did was right or wrong, child. I'm saying it was necessary. And that's a burden you'll carry for the rest of your life. The knowledge that you have the power to change people and the responsibility to choose when and how to use it. Seren wanted to argue, but Thea was approaching with a grim expression. We've got a problem, she said. The injured from the attack. There's too many. The healers are overwhelmed. People are dying. The weight of Cassius's words crashed down on her. She had power. She had responsibility. And right now people needed her. Take me to them, she said. What? For the next 12 hours, Seren worked without rest. She moved through the healing wings like a silver ghost, touching wounds and watching them close, straightening broken bones, purging infections, bringing people back from the edge of death. She lost track of how many she healed. 50? 100? More? Her power seemed endless, fed by desperation and the absolute need to save everyone she could. But there was one she couldn't save. His name was Marcus, a young guard who'd taken a blade through the chest defending the eastern wall. By the time they brought him to her, he'd lost too much blood. The light in his eyes was already fading. Seren tried anyway. She poured her power into him, desperately seeking the spark of life to nurture, to strengthen. But there was nothing left. The wound had severed too many vital vessels. He'd been gone before they even laid him on the table. She felt him die beneath her hands, and something inside her broke. I'm sorry, she whispered to his body. I'm so sorry. Kael found her there an hour later, still sitting beside the dead guard, her hands dark with dried blood. You did everything you could, he said gently. It wasn't enough. Her voice was hollow. I saved so many, but I couldn't save him. What good is all this power if I still can't save everyone? No one can save everyone, Seren, not even you. Kael knelt beside her. But you saved dozens who would have died. You stopped a massacre. You transformed enemies into people who might actually understand why they were wrong. That's not failure. He paused, searching for words. That's what heroes do. I'm not a hero. I'm just a girl who got lucky with her curse. You're the girl who turned poison into healing, who faced a monster and saved him, who stood in front of an army and showed them mercy when they deserved none. Kael took her blood-stained hands in his. You're not just a girl anymore, Seren. You're a symbol of change, of possibility, of everything the Highlands could become if we stopped being afraid of what's different. That's too much, she whispered. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want... She stopped, realizing she didn't even know what she wanted anymore. Come with me, Kael said. There's something you need to see. He led her through the fortress to the highest tower, where a window looked out over the valley. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and in the valley below, hundreds of tents, thousands of people. They started arriving last night, Kael explained. After word spread about the attack, outcasts from every pack in the Highlands, Cursed bloodlines who'd been hiding in shame, omegas who'd been rejected, betas who didn't fit the mold. He gestured at the sprawling encampment. They're all here because of you, because you proved that being different isn't a death sentence, that curses can become gifts, that transformation is possible. Seren stared at the sea of tents, overwhelmed. What am I supposed to do with all of them? Whatever you want. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Kale's voice grew firm with decision. I'm going to open the fortress, tear down the hierarchies that kept people in boxes, build a new system where worth is measured by character, not bloodline, where cursed and blessed can work together instead of fighting. He looked at her. And I'm hoping you'll help me, as my equal, my partner in reshaping the Highlands. Your equal? Seren turned to face him, searching his eyes. Kael, I'm 13 years old. I'm an Omega. I'm the person who saved my life and my sanity. The person who healed hundreds. The person who just stopped a war before it could start. Kael's expression was intense. Age doesn't matter. Designation doesn't matter. What matters is what you can do and what you choose to do with it. And I'm choosing to trust you with the future of everything I've built. It was too much. The responsibility, the trust, the sheer weight of what he was offering. But as Seren looked out at the valley full of people who'd come seeking the same things she'd sought, acceptance, safety, transformation, she realized she'd already made her choice. She'd made it the moment she took off that collar in the transformation chamber. The moment she chose to risk everything instead of playing it safe. All right, she said quietly, we'll do it together. Build something new, but on one condition. Name it. No more trials, no more forcing people to prove their worth by surviving death. If we're going to build a new system, it starts with respecting life, not testing how much people can endure. Kale smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Deal. The trials end today. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of careful negotiation, restructuring, and occasional setbacks. But slowly, impossibly, Frostmark Citadel became something unprecedented in Highland history. The strict pack hierarchies dissolved. Alphas worked alongside Omegas. Cursed bloodlines mingled with pure ones. Instead of rank-determining role, people were assigned positions based on skill and choice. Seren established the first healing sanctuary, where anyone could receive care regardless of their background or ability to pay. She trained others in conventional healing, though her unique abilities remained hers alone. And she learned, slowly, carefully, to live with the knowledge that she had power beyond measure and the responsibility to use it wisely. The purists she'd transformed became the most ardent supporters of the new system, their forced empathy evolving into genuine understanding. Some even joined the sanctuary as healers themselves, trying to atone for the violence they'd once championed. Not everyone accepted the changes. Some packs in the southern territories denounced Kael as a traitor to tradition. Others spread rumors that Seren had corrupted him, that her healing was actually a form of slow poison. But the people who'd been healed knew better, and the outcasts who'd found sanctuary knew better. And slowly, pack by pack, the Highlands began to shift. 6 months after the solstice attack, Elder Cassius returned to Frostmark with a proposal. The Southern Confederacy wants to formalize our arrangement, he said, addressing Kael and Seren in the council chamber. They're willing to recognize Frostmark as an autonomous territory with its own laws and customs, provided you agree to certain terms. Such as? Kael asked warily. No expansion by force, no recruiting from other packs without consent, and, Cassius looked at Seren, regular demonstrations that your Omega's abilities remain under control and are used only for healing, not compulsion. The empathy transformation, Seren said flatly. They're still afraid of that. Can you blame them? Cassius's expression was sympathetic. You have the power to rewrite people's fundamental nature. That's terrifying. But if you agree to oversight, if you submit to evaluation and prove you're using your power responsibly, they'll stop calling for your execution. It was another compromise, another set of chains disguised as protection. Seren looked at Kael, who gave her a slight nod. Her choice. I agree, she said, but I have terms too. The packs have to stop exiling cursed bloodlines. Stop throwing away children because they're different. Anyone who would face death or exile in their home pack can come here instead, and they have to be allowed to leave freely if they choose. Cassius considered this. You're asking for the right to disrupt pack cohesion across the Highlands. I'm asking for the right to save lives that would otherwise be wasted. If that disrupts pack cohesion, maybe those packs need disrupting. To her surprise, Cassia smiled. A real smile, warm and approving. You remind me of the woman from the old texts, not in your power, but in your conviction. She believed she could reshape the world too. He stood. I'll take your terms to the Confederacy. I suspect they'll agree. You've proven yourself too valuable to antagonize. After he left, Seren and Kael sat in silence for a moment. We're actually doing it, she said wonderingly. Building something new, something that shouldn't be possible. We're making it possible, Kael corrected. Together, the cursed king and the blessed Omega. Quite the partnership. Seren thought about how far she'd come. From the isolated cabin where she'd grown up untouched and unloved, to this fortress where she'd found purpose and belonging. From the girl who'd been called poison to the woman who'd become a healer. Do you think it'll last? She asked quietly. This new world we're building? Or will it fall apart the moment we're gone? That depends on what we build it on. Kael moved to the window, looking out over the fortress that had become a sanctuary. If we build it on fear and control, it'll crumble. But if we build it on choice, on respect, on the idea that everyone has value regardless of their bloodline, maybe it'll outlive us both. I hope so. Seren joined him at the window. Because I don't want to have bled and suffered and lost so much just to create something temporary. Then we make it permanent. We write it into law, into culture, into the very foundation of how the Highlands operate. Kael's voice was fierce with determination. We make it so complete that by the time we're gone, no one can remember how things used to be. Years passed. Seren grew from a girl into a young woman, her power growing with her but always under her control. She never used the empathy transformation again. The memory of violating those purists' minds haunted her too deeply, but she didn't need to. Her healing alone was revolutionary enough. The sanctuary expanded, becoming a network of healing houses across the Highlands. Cursed bloodlines stopped being shameful secrets and started being valuable assets. Omegas rose to positions of leadership. The rigid hierarchies that had defined pack life for centuries gradually dissolved into something more fluid, more adaptive. Not everyone was happy. There were still extremists, still those who believed in the old ways, but they were fewer now, and growing fewer every year. On the 5th anniversary of the night she'd broken Kael's curse, Seren stood on the same battlements where they'd first talked about building a new world. The fortress below hummed with activity, not the activity of war and trials, but of building and learning and growing. Kael found her there, as he often did when she needed to think. You're brooding, he observed. I'm reflecting, she corrected. There's a difference. What about? Seren gestured at the fortress, the valley, the highlands stretching to the horizon. All of this. 5 years ago, I was a cursed Omega everyone wanted dead. Now I'm... What am I, Kael? What have I become? What do you want to be? It was the question he always asked when she got lost in her own head. And after 5 years, she finally had an answer. Someone who proves that survival isn't about being the strongest or the purest or the most traditional. It's about being willing to transform, to adapt, to become something entirely new when the old ways don't work anymore. She looked at him, this man who'd been a monster and become a king worth following. I want to be proof that change is possible, that curses can become gifts, that outcasts can reshape the world. Kael smiled. Then that's exactly what you are. The living proof that the impossible is just another word for something no one's been brave enough to try yet. Below them, a group of children played in the courtyard, alphas and omegas together, with no hierarchy dividing them. One of them was little Mina, running on legs that had once been twisted and useless. Seren had healed her, and in doing so, she had healed something deeper, the belief that some things couldn't be fixed, that some people weren't worth saving, that transformation was impossible. She'd proven them all wrong, and in the harsh frontier highlands where she'd once been rejected as a walking death sentence, she now stood unchallenged, not because people feared her power, but because they'd seen what she could build with it. The girl no one could touch had become the woman everyone needed. The curse had become a gift. and the impossible had become inevitable. "Thank you," she said quietly to Kyle. "For what?" "For seeing me as something other than poison, for giving me the chance to become something more." She paused. "For choosing to survive with me instead of dying alone." Kyle took her hand. No barriers, no burning, just warmth and certainty. "We chose to survive together, and we built something worth surviving for. That's not something to thank me for. That's something we did. Together." Together. The word that had once seemed impossible for a girl whose curse killed everything she touched. But Seren had learned that nothing was truly impossible. Some things just required more courage, more pain, more transformation than anyone thought they could survive. And she'd survived it all, from the edge of exile to the heart of revolution, from cursed to blessed, from nothing to everything that mattered. The mountain had tried to devour her. The trials had tried to break her. The world had tried to condemn her, but she'd transformed it all instead. And as the sun set over the highlands, over the fortress that had become a sanctuary, over the packs that had learned to value difference, over the world she'd helped reshape, Seren Vale smiled. She wasn't the girl they'd thrown away anymore. She was the future they couldn't stop. And the story of the cursed Omega who became a legend was only just beginning.